Hi, everyone, and welcome to What About Grief? I'm your host, Larry Holm. Since my wife, Sarah, passed away 2 years ago, I've been trying to understand how to better cope with and get through the process of grief. And this podcast is a way to seek out answers. I want to thank all of you who have reached out to me either by direct message or speaking with me in person about your grief after you listened to the trailer episode. I do appreciate your openness in sharing your thoughts, and my hope is that this podcast can be of some assistance. Not long after I lost Sarah, I heard about Grief Share, 14 weekly group sessions to discuss various aspects of grief each week. I signed up for the class, and to say I was nervous and not sure what I was getting into was an understatement. But the two women who spearheaded the group quickly put me at ease and had a tremendous impact on my grief journey, and I'm honored to have them on today's episode. Mary Spooner and Erin Mays are my guests, and the mother-daughter duo have an impactful story to tell on how grief became part of their daily life through tragedy, how it led to their decision to begin hosting classes, and some observations they see from those who have attended the sessions. Mary and Erin, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Larry.
I must say it's a little strange for me to be on the other side of the table asking you both questions after being a student of yours, but I am really humbled and grateful that the two of you are here and continue to help others with their grief. Carrie Spooner was your daughter, Mary, and your sister, Erin, and was living in Oakland, California when she was murdered by a stranger back in 1998 at the age of 30. We will discuss those details in a minute, but first let's remember Carrie. Give us a description, paint a picture of Carrie to us. First, Mary, from a mother's perspective, and then Erin from a sister's perspective.
I think Carrie was little but mighty, fiercely loyal. No one said anything against her or her family. She would not fight back, but she would react strongly, and you knew exactly where you were. She was also very strong. She had a number of back and hip surgeries, and she came through them very, very well, stronger, with a great attitude, and I think that's what helped her to want to help other people by becoming a physician.
Erin?
I was going to say the exact same thing. I'm the biggest, fiercely loyal, incredibly kind. But she was my big sister. And I think the running joke growing up, or I guess after we grew up, I'm 5'9" and she's 5'2". And so my uncle always called her Big Kid. And I was Spot, but that's a totally different story. But she was small but mighty. And she, like Mom said, she was a pediatrician. And I think her kindness and her lack of judgment of others not before, but her lack of judgment of others and just getting to know them for who she was, I think that really helped her connect with her patients. And I think the fact that she looked like she was 12 probably also helped her connect.
Explain what happened to Carrie in Oakland and how you both found out about it.
From what we learned with the police, there was a carpet cleaner in her house, and apparently he lost his temper and repeatedly stabbed her. And as Erin said, she was pretty tiny, so it was a vicious attack. Her husband found her when he came home from work. He called his parents. His mom called me. My husband was working in New York City, so I called him, and then I called Erin and let them know. We all met at the airport to go out there. And, a blessing of that was that because my husband traveled so much, he knew all the flight attendants and the ticket agents. And they were able to place us in a seating of 4 that was separate from everyone else in the cabin of the plane. And it was because I can't even describe how we felt. We were numb.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what the early emotions were that first entered into your mind? Obviously, it wasn't grief.
I think the numbness and just the way she lost her life, I worried that she must have been so afraid. She was alone. And Erin had said to me at one point when I said that was, "No, Mom, she wasn't there anymore. She got herself out."
When did grief come into your life, and how did you handle grief?
Good question. I don't know when my shock actually turned into grief. And how did I handle it early on? I think I shut down. I felt incredibly alone in my grief. I felt I had great support. I was newly married. I obviously have my close relationship with my mom and my dad. I had great friends. I had a ton of support. But I felt so alone because I felt like I was the only one who had lost a sister. I was the only one who had lost Carrie as a sister. And I felt like a lot of people undervalued or underestimated the closeness of that sibling bond. I think there's such a variety. Like some siblings are close, some are not. So I felt like people put me in the role of I needed to support my parents. I needed to support my brother-in-law. I needed to be strong for everybody else. And nobody really recognized my grief. And then my parents were grieving and my sister was gone. So the people that I would normally go to for support, I couldn't go to them because they were already carrying their own heavy grief. So I think I felt alone. I kind of shut down. I pressed a lot of stuff down, and that just made my grief journey, my healing process, so many years longer than it needed to be.
Did you both kind of have a different grief path? It sounds you probably didn't grieve the same.
I feel like we intersected a lot, but it was a lot of grieving together, but also a lot of grieving separately. And I mean, you can talk about Becky, our amazing grief counselor.
Yeah, I'm kind of a controller, so it was like, I need to know how to do this. And there weren't any rules. I didn't know how to do it. And we just kind of, as Erin said, we came together, and then we'd go off into our little spot, and then we'd come back together. One thing that I experienced, which I thought was odd, was that I was kind of outside myself, watching myself. And it was like, okay, there goes her mother. She's doing this. Or her mother just said that. It was I don't know if it was a way of me kind of pulling myself away so I wasn't dealing so deeply with it. But it was a very odd feeling. And that lasted for a couple of weeks.
Did you ever kind of go dark? Like, did your emotions ever lead you down a dark path that it was hard to get out of?
I don't remember doing that. Sadness, deep sadness, and tears. And sometimes I didn't want to cry because I never thought I'd come back from those tears. I don't know if that makes sense, but just, can I come back to neutral?
Is it different to grieve someone who was killed in an instant, like Carrie was, or in a car crash or something to that effect, versus someone like me who Sarah was taken slowly away by sickness, and in my mind, I guess I was preparing for it, but you weren't even able to say goodbye or see her one last time. How did you guys deal with that, not being able to see her or say goodbye?
It's funny, we get that question a lot. I think that inevitably comes up in Grief Share because we do have people with so many different types of losses in the groups. And I think the net spot that we've landed on is that eventually we're all just dealing with loss. And I think whether it's something that happens in an instant or something that's more of a slower progression to the loss, I think you're just trading one type of pain for another. With Carrie, a huge blessing. I mean, yes, she did die instantly, but a huge blessing in all this, I think, for our family is that none of us had any regrets. So there was nothing unspoken. I was out in California for 3 weeks, just a couple months for work. I was out there for 3 weeks, just a couple months before Carrie died. So I got to spend a lot of time with her. We're very close. So we never hung up the phone without saying, I love you. I had a voicemail from her that very morning where she told me that she loved me. And I know that she knew how much I loved her. So I think not having regrets is the blessing in helping us grieve her leaving instantly.
So Carrie was murdered in 1998 at 30 years old. You two began teaching grief classes in 2022. So how did you deal with your individual grief during that span of 20 plus years? That's a lot of time. And then all of a sudden decide to lead classes.
Erin mentioned Becky. We had a wonderful grief counselor. Right after I heard the news about Carrie, I called a friend who was director of social service at the hospital, and he gave us her name. And we went to her for weeks and months. And, separately, Erin and I, my husband and I, all four of us, in all different kinds of variations. And again, I mentioned I was a controller. She kind of helped me walk through how to do this with my personality. And there's so many questions of, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do. One of the questions that I had was, what do I say to people when they say, how are you doing?
Don't you hate that question?
Yeah, it's like, how do you think I'm doing?
That, and do you have any siblings?
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
got others.
Yeah.
And, she gave me the line of just tell them that we're coming along. And I have used that and shared that so many times. And she really was our lifeline, I think. I'm not sure we would have recovered as we have without that professional help.
After all these years, where are you two in your grief, and how do you handle those moments where grief just ambushes you when you least expect it and can take a good day into all of a sudden a sad day or sad remembrance of Carrie?
I feel like I don't really have grief ambushes anymore, so let that be a hopeful thing to share with everybody out there, that it does soften. And I think I get lonely for her. I get very lonely for her, especially during those times when I would just go to my sister for help. I mean, we mentioned earlier, she's a pediatrician, and I remember a really lonely time was when I have 2 daughters. So when I had them and when they were young, and, you always get that temperature that spikes or something that they swallowed or whatever, and I didn't have my sister to go to. So that would be lonely. Now it's just missing her, and I cry. I think about her, I cry and feel better. But, she's my sister. She's with me. She'll always be my sister. She'll always be with me. I think after 25 years since her loss, and knowing that I can still feel her so closely with me, I don't fear the ambushes as much anymore because I know she's not going anywhere. I know she's not going to leave me.
I think, too, when you do get the ambush, with time, you're going to come out the other side. And that, it'll be okay again.
I hate the ambushes.
They're the worst.
Yeah.
They're the worst.
They're still very raw for me after a couple years. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You feel them physically.
Oh, my gosh.
Physically as well as emotionally.
It can totally just change your day, and not for the better. Are you able to put sadness in the background if you want to?
Yes. Because I know that if I need to be happy, I need to be supportive, I can't spend the rest of my life being buried by that.
I think a big difference or realization that I had too is that I don't have to work so hard to put it in the back. I think it's always going to be there. It's always going to be a part of me, but it's not the part that I lead with. And I don't think it's the first thing that people see in me anymore. And there was a time in my life when it was.
You started Carrie's Kid Foundation in her honor. Tell us how that came about and a little bit about the foundation.
Well, we told you she was little but mighty. And actually, she started it when she was in her residency. She realized that there were so many children in the community that either were afraid to come to the hospital with their parents or couldn't come. And so she worked, bullied, Head Start to create a van that she staffed with her fellow residents, dental students, nursing students, and they went out into the communities and served the kids. And after she died, then it became Carrie's Kids. But she did it.
So it's 20 plus years since Carrie passed away, and now the two of you are leading a grief group. What made you decide to do that? And thank you for doing it. Selfishly, thank you for doing it.
Personally, for me, it was a God thing. I didn't come into this saying I want to lead a grief support group. I think after a loss, I think we're all searching for purpose and searching for a way to serve others and looking for ways to use the lessons that we've learned to honor our loved one and make the loss not in vain. But the grief share thing coming into our lives was a total God thing. There was a woman at our church whose husband had passed away. He had battled cancer for a very long time. And this woman, who's also a friend of ours, was going to a grief support group probably in a town 30 minutes away or so. And it was through the hospital where her husband was. And fast forward to a conversation I was having with another person who was just saying how crazy it was that our friend had to go so far away for a grief support group, and why couldn't our church offer something like that? And that was all it was. Yeah. So my friend had mentioned that, and then the seed was planted, and I researched it. We found Grief Share, and leadership at the church was 100% on board, and everything just fell into place. I grabbed my mom. So it came together so seamlessly and naturally and easily. It honestly felt like it was meant to be.
Had you counseled anyone before, or I guess how did you prepare to be leaders all of a sudden for this class?
Once again, I would say it's a God thing, because I look back at all of the different experiences that I had leading up to where we were when we started Grief Share, and I could see how at the time I didn't know that those experiences were preparing me for this. But now I look back and I see that they were. I mean, first and foremost, we've traveled through grief. So I think that's like a PhD in grief.
For sure.
So we come in with that experience. And then, I volunteered at Camp Hope, which was a camp for children who were grieving the loss of a parent or sibling. And then down the road, I volunteered for Willow House, and that was a monthly support group for grieving families. And then I became a Stephen minister at church, and then I became a Stephen leader, and I led Bible studies, and just all of those things came together in helping me sort of develop the skills needed, I think, to facilitate a group in grief. But it also helped me build the relationships with the people who would support this whole process and help the program grow at our church specifically. So at the time, I didn't know the value in those beyond just what it was doing for me, but now I see how it all works together.
Were you surprised by the amount of people who showed up for that first session? Because I know I walked in like lost, nervous, like I said at the top of the show, not knowing what to expect, not understanding grief. And now here you two are, and there's, I think, 30 of us in that first class. So what were your first thoughts when,
oh, no.
What have we done, right? Can we stop the class?
We need more facilitators.
Yeah, lock the doors.
Actually, it's pretty funny, and then I'll let you go. In researching Grief Share, I called up a leader of another Grief Share group at another church a few towns away. And I just remember her saying to me, don't be discouraged if nobody shows up to your first group. It takes a while. You have to build awareness. And so I was kind of discouraged by that, but I was like, okay, it is what it is. And then, like you said, 30 people. So.
As Erin said, I think there was a moment of panic.
Do we have enough
Oh my
workbooks?
gosh, how do we do? Yeah, just the mechanics of it. But just surprised at the courage that people had. It took courage to make that decision and to walk through the door. And I felt very honored that they were entrusting, their feelings to us.
Agreed.
So how it works is you watch a video for 30, 40 minutes on a specific topic as one big group, and then you break off into small groups. And Mary, you were my small group leader. What were your kind of early impressions of the group, and how do you get people to talk about their grief when, they probably don't want to, or maybe embarrassed or nervous? How do you draw them out?
I know God put us together. It was an amazing group. People, without really much prompting from me, were willing to offer their stories. And they were respectful with each other as you got to know each other, more and more of your own advice coming out and reassurance and support of the other ones. I also found that silence is a great tool. If we can just sit and be silent, somebody is going to open their heart and say something.
Yeah, and then others follow.
Yes.
Yeah. I noticed that in our group. Why is it seems, at least from my perspective, why don't people really talk about grief like they do other emotions? Why do you think it's not really spoken about? Or is it? I don't feel like it is, but maybe you guys disagree.
I think, first of all, it makes people uncomfortable. And, when you're on the receiving end, you hear a lot of platitudes. They think they're being helpful, but they're not. They're hurtful. And what we found, and the advice I give any chance I can now, is people don't say anything because they don't know what to say. And I will say to that person, then just say, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I think people, too, are so afraid of causing you pain by bringing up the loss. And it's like, I've already experienced it. Like, I'm living in it. So don't hesitate for a second to talk to me about it. Because I think talking about it is so healing.
Yeah, I like when people bring up Sarah. It's therapeutic for me, and physically she's not here, but she lives on in so many people, obviously. Her personality, her smile, and it's a favorite topic of mine to talk about. And I'm sure you all obviously like to speak about Carrie, and also started a foundation in her name. So her legacy lives on, no doubt.
I think when people share stories of your loved one, too, you learn different things about them because everybody's had a different experience or a different relationship with your loved one. So to be able to still learn new things about your loved one, even after they've passed, I mean, that is such a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've now taught 3 sessions of
we are
of grief
pros.
share. Yeah. That's why I have you on this podcast. A few hundred people have gone through
Thousands.
the class.
Thousands.
No, but over, close to 200 people, which is pretty good. What are your impressions, and what is some of the feedback that you hear from some of the people who have gone through the 14 weeks, good or bad? What does it look like from week 1 to week 14, and what do you hear?
I think it's a relief for a lot of them just to be able to say it out loud, to be in a safe space where nobody judges how they feel.
I think one of the most powerful things of the Grief Share program is the small group component. And I think the community that's created there and the connections that are made are so healing and so sustaining to the people who come who are so deep in their grief, because it's the one place where, like you said, there's no judgment. They don't have to explain how they're feeling because people just get it. So you can walk in, and even though you're in a room full of strangers, you feel known. And then to be with those people, to travel the path of grief for 3 months with those people, you really build strong connections. And it's a support system that I think is so vital when you're healing from your grief. And we did not have that. But I wish this had been available, or we had been aware of it when we were grieving.
I think it's helpful, too, that they can look at us and we're still standing upright. You know, we survived.
Yeah. I think also, too, it's easier to speak with people about your grief that are living in the moment with it, you know, versus others. I felt more comfortable speaking with quote-unquote strangers about my grief journey than I did sometimes with other people. And to your point, it's a comfortable, safe zone. And our small group, you know, we still try to get together for dinners every once in a while, and we even invite Erin, who's not part of our small group, but, you know, she's the overall leader of the class.
I'm an honorary member.
Yeah, so we bring her in.
Sometimes I'm allowed to.
Yeah. Is there a trend or one emotion you see from every session regarding grief? Is there something that reoccurs that, yep, that person or this group, that they're experiencing it, they see it, they understand it, or they don't?
It's a good question because every group is totally different. I think the one consistent theme that keeps coming up, though, and it's such a basic, obvious theme, but it's everybody is struggling with loneliness. And I think that's another reason why the group is so powerful, because it helps you feel not quite so lonely in that time when you're together.
Yeah. I think, too, what the public doesn't understand is that there's no wrong way to grieve. Everybody grieves differently. And if it takes me 10 years to grieve, then that's fine, because that's the way I'm wired. But some people get over it quicker, not over it, but deal with it better on a quicker basis. But yeah, I think I felt at times, am I doing this right when I was going through the sessions? Am I grieving right? And I think there is no right or wrong way.
No rule book.
Yeah, right?
It'd be much easier if there were.
Yeah. What's your definition of grief? Just out of curiosity.
Well, one thing I say to people is that it's not a linear path. It's up and down, back and forth. And that there's no, as Erin said, there's no rules. And the other thing that I have found, and I also tell people, is that with time, it gets softer. It's always there, you know, and if you know that you're going to recover from it, then you can kind of go into your heart and take out some of those memories and think about them and kind of look at them and talk about them, and then you can put them away, and you know you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I like that you can bring them out when you want to, wrap them up when you're done, and save them for another day. I think that's a good way to.
And I think it doesn't define you. You know, I'm not the mother who lost a daughter.
It did for a while, though.
Because it did for a while, because you're just totally encompassed by it.
But it won't always define you.
Right, exactly.
Do you think grievers hold on to their past too much? Keep the room that their loved one in exact, keep all the clothes, keep the photos up. Do you think they live in the past too much and not in the present? Or is there kind of a balance? A balance somewhere in there, in between those two emotions? Again, it's individual.
I was just going to say, to your point earlier, it's different for everybody. But I think the hazard of living in the past too much is getting stuck. And grief is a journey. It's a process. It's not kind of a one and done thing that you master or accomplish and then move on to the next thing in your life. And grief being as miserable and hard and emotionally draining as we all know it to be, that is not a place you want to be stuck. Yeah. So I would caution about doing things that may make you stay in that dark grief place longer than you really need to be.
Can you have joy and sadness in your life? Can you have two emotions at one time when dealing with your grief? Can we enjoy life and move forward, but yet still have sadness and be overcome by those emotions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Phew.
Yeah. I was trying to think of something profound after that.
Yes.
I remember one question I had after Carrie died was, is it okay to laugh? Am I doing her a disservice to be happy? And I realized I would be doing her a disservice to be unhappy. That, yes, this is a huge hole in my life, but I need to go on. I need to be productive. I need to be happy. I need to support my family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think as you heal, I think you find ways of balancing that, and I'm thinking of Christmas. We gather for Christmas. It is a happy, joyful, meaningful holiday for all of us, and we want to enjoy it. We don't want to be sad. Clearly, we are missing my sister there. So we acknowledge that. We have a candle that we light, and it's the Carrie candle. We bring it out at Christmas, and she's got her own votive holder, and it's this votive that lasts like 12 hours, and she'll sit on the coffee table while we're opening presents, and at the end of the day, she's on the dining room table while we're having Christmas dinner. And it's just sort of that reminder, sad that she's not here, but the reminder that she is here. Mm. And, I'll just sort of take time outs during the day, and, I'll look at the candle and just kind of let myself feel that, and then come back to the things that we do have to celebrate, because there are so many things to celebrate.
I agree. I think Sarah would want me to be out there and having fun and living life and traveling and hanging out with friends and family. And yes, grieve whenever I feel like it, but, don't live in the past. Keep going forward. Have fun. Enjoy life. Because I know if the roles were reversed, she would be doing that. So, so I might as well, right?
Hanging out with her grief share leaders.
Exactly. I don't know if she'd host a podcast, but I kind of want to circle back to the question: how are you doing? What doesn't the public know or about dealing with somebody who's going through grief? That how are you doing is something we all hate to hear. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's just taking some food over and just leaving it at the front porch and hitting the doorbell and then leave, right? I mean, there's ways to help people through their grief without asking that horrible question, how are you doing? I hate that question. Yeah. I'm sure you all do too. We talked about it briefly, but it's the worst.
I think one piece of advice I heard later was because people want to help, and they'll say, what can I do?
And they have good intentions.
Good intentions. What this man told me, he said, make a list. And just of everything you need to get done, or the errands you need to get done, or grocery shopping, whatever it is, post it on your phone. And when they call, there's your list right there. Just give them something to do. And the person who's offering appreciates that too, because they, as you said, they do want to help.
What's a lesson you guys have learned from leading these classes about your own grief that maybe you didn't know before? Has anything new come about?
Yeah, I think it surprised me. I mean, as you mentioned before, we're 25 years past the loss of Carrie, and I'm still learning new things. I'm still grieving her. There's still healing to be had, which I think is great because I keep learning from this experience. And I think it's going to be a lifelong teacher for me. And the lessons that I learned just in compassion and humility and serving others, and then the practical things about grief, like making a list and keeping it by the phone and being able to share that knowledge with others. And I'm willing to be taught, keep teaching me. So yeah, I'm learning. I've learned a lot since we started this.
What have I learned? I think that grief manifests itself in so many different ways, that there's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. I always say no timelines. Today you're here, tomorrow you're 50 yards back, the next day you're 100 yards ahead.
I read that grief is all we have left of that person or that loved one. Do you guys agree with that statement? That grief is it?
I think my grieving now is loneliness and disappointment that we can't share things with her. Things that she wasn't a mom, was never able to be a mom. I don't have any of her grandchildren. Those pieces that are missing if she had had a usual life, that makes me lonely. And sorry that it didn't happen the way my dream was.
It robbed you of time.
Yes.
With future time with her. Yeah, I can totally relate to that too. Yeah.
But I don't want grief to be her legacy.
Right.
I want the memories and, like you were saying about Sarah, her laugh. I mean, I can see my sister popping up out of the back seat, surprising me and laughing, and like that's what I want to carry with me. And that's what I do carry with me. When I think grief, I think sadness and healing.
How proud do you think Carrie would be of the two of you leading these classes? Because I know Sarah would be like, you're hosting a podcast? You've got to be crazy. Why are you doing this? But how proud do you think she would be of the foundation, Carrie's kids, and what you are doing, though, for others? Because it's truly a beautiful thing.
I think she would be kind of awestruck because she, I don't think she realized the impact she had and the differences and the changes she made and how she could affect people. So I think she would be surprised that all of this came from her. I know she's part of our sessions. I know that when I'm stuck for something to say, there's Carrie. She'll give me a little aha moment, and a you go, Mom moment.
How do you remember Carrie on the day of her death? Has it changed over 20 plus years? Because for me right now, only 2 years in, I want to be alone. That might change. But right now, it's just kind of me remembering Sarah in my own way. How do you guys remember her on that day?
That's a good question.
Well, that day was also Erin's birthday. So we struggled with that until we realized, well, we celebrate both girls. But that was a hard one to get past.
Yeah.
Yeah. We spend it together.
Yeah.
We spend it together, usually gardening, which I hate to garden, so I don't know why we garden every May 5th. But
because Mom said.
But that's what we do. I don't know that Carrie liked to garden either.
No, she didn't. I don't know why I thought of that.
Hey, we got to change that.
25 years later, we're coming up with something new.
You decide this year.
Do any good plants come out of it, or are they?
You're asking hard questions, Larry.
Well, kind of to wrap it up here, I thought about the analogy of the pebble being thrown in the pond and the ripples, that come from that. They start tight and they start to widen out to the edges of the pond. They get bigger and wider. And from Carrie's tragic death, to the two of you hosting a class, to me attending that class, to me now hosting a podcast, Carrie's death and your grief has led to helping so many people. We will never know, right? That obviously you guys come in contact with them, but through this podcast, there's obviously people that I'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe that just the waves of that pebble have expanded so much from something so tragic?
I find it's very humbling that, obviously I'd give everything to have her come back. But it really fills my heart to know that we are helping others, that maybe their grief journey is a little bit softer because of things that we can offer. We have started a couple things through the church. We started a Blue Christmas service, which is a service of remembrance during the holiday season. And then we're reaching out now through Stephen Ministry to a number of people.
I think it is amazing to me that the impact can be so much bigger than we would ever think. And it just reminds me that even out of the most devastating, soul-crushing experience of our life, beauty can still come. And that our loved ones, Carrie, Sarah, they did not die in vain. Like, they are living on. Their legacy continues through us and through you and through the healing and care that's just being put out there.
And I'd like to think that maybe they're up there, having a coffee. High-fiving each other, having a coffee, and going, what are they doing down there?
Yeah. I can't believe she said that.
Yeah.
Oh, and Carrie would say she was 5'2" and a half, not 5'2".
Yes.
Let's make sure we keep that in the podcast.
That half was very important.
Yeah. Well, I can only say on behalf of all of us who have been through your classes and getting to know you both, thank you for opening up through Carrie's tragedy and sharing your soul and your compassion, your tenderness and love to all of us who are experiencing grief for the first time. I know it's been a true blessing for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a blessing for us as well, really.
My thanks to Mary Spooner and Erin Mays. What About Grief is available monthly on all major podcast listening platforms. Please follow the podcast as well as rate and review the show on Apple Podcast. The executive producer of What About Grief is Marcia Anderson. Logo artwork was designed by TED Studios. This episode was recorded at BAM Studios in Chicago. And lastly, feel free to email us at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com.